Kia ora and welcome to the first episode of Chop's Shop. This is just going to be an experimental woodworking, possibly some other materials involved, channel which is just essentially about having fun. There are many things I want to and need to make, which I will video and which I will post. The first one, well, on the priority of things is I need a chest to put all my rock climbing gear in, which is slowly spreading throughout the bedroom. I need to build legs for a coffee table top I've already made. I want to build a side table. I have a cool Lego Man headlamp I have the idea I want to build. And also I need to build a shoe rack. So there's many things, not to mention a chess set for a friend who I've already said I'd make. So there's not going to be a shortage of things that I need to make. However, for the first video I post, for the first one I do, I would like to do a very simple one. This here is a Harry Potter wand, or a magic wand if you don't want to get sued for copyright. But I'm a massive fan of Harry Potter, and when I first bought this lathe, one of the first things, well actually the second thing I made was this wand here. It's quite short, quite stubby. It has a knot in it here, which gives a little bit of movement. Very simple. I mean, the third thing I had ever laid in my life. So I would like to make another one just for the first step of me putting a video on YouTube. And for that I'm going to use this bit of wood. It's not going to be the whole length, but I have put a nice line in there. It's part of a table leg I made, but didn't like it, and also it split off. So I'll chuck this in the lathe, turn it down, and yeah, show you the end result. It's a bit of fun and very simple to make. Cheers. So first I'll take a saw and try and take that off a bit, and that one I'm not too worried about, but this is a bit of a chunk, so I'll take that off. I'll bring it down to round. I'll figure out exactly where I'm gonna have this one. I think I want the handle on here, just sort of before where this begins, and then bring it out to there.
Chapter 29. Continued. Harry awoke very early the next day, feeling almost as anxious as he had done on the morning of his disciplinary hearing at the Ministry of Magic. It was not only the prospect of breaking into Umbridge's office and using her fire to speak to Sirius that was making him feel nervous, though that was certainly bad enough. Today also happened to be the first time Harry would be in close proximity to Snape since Snape had thrown him out of his office. After lying in bed for a while, thinking about the day ahead, Harry got up very quietly and moved across to the window beside Neville's bed and stared out on a truly glorious morning. The sky was a clear, misty, opalescent blue. Directly ahead of him, Harry could see the towering beech tree below which his father had once tormented Snape. He was not sure what Sirius could possibly say to him that would make up for what he had seen in the Pensieve, but he was desperate to hear Sirius's own account of what had happened, to know of any mitigating factors there might have been, any excuse at all for his father's behaviour. Something caught Harry's attention, movement on the edge of the Forbidden Forest. Harry squinted into the sun and saw Hagrid emerging from between the trees. He seemed to be limping. As Harry watched, Hagrid staggered to the door of his cabin and disappeared inside it. Harry watched the cabin for several minutes. Hagrid did not emerge again, but smoke furled from the chimney, so Hagrid could not be so badly injured that he was unequal to stoking the fire. Harry turned away from the window, headed back to his trunk, and started to dress. With the prospect of forcing entry into Umbridge's office ahead, Harry had never expected the day to be a restful one, but he had not reckoned on Hermione's almost continual attempts to dissuade him from what he was planning to do at 5 o'clock. For the first time ever, she was at least as inattentive to Professor Binns in History of Magic as Harry and Ron were, keeping up a stream of whispered admonitions that Harry tried very hard to ignore. "And if she does catch you there, apart from being expelled, she'll be able to guess you've been talking to Snuffles, and this time I expect she'll force you to drink Veritaserum and answer her questions." "Hermione," said Ron in a low and indignant voice, "are you going to stop telling Harry off and listen to Binns, or am I going to have to take my own notes? You take notes for a change, it won't kill you." By the time they reached the dungeons, neither Harry nor Ron was speaking to Hermione. Undeterred, she took advantage of their silence to maintain an uninterrupted flow of dire warnings, all uttered under her breath in a vehement hiss that caused Seamus to waste 5 whole minutes checking his cauldron for leaks. Snape, meanwhile, seemed to have decided to act as though Harry were invisible. Harry was, of course, well used to this tactic, as it was one of Uncle Vernon's favourites, and on the whole was grateful he had to suffer nothing worse. In fact, compared to what he usually had to endure from Snape in the way of taunts and snide remarks, he found the new approach something of an improvement, and was pleased to find that when left well alone, he was able to concoct an invigoration draught quite easily. At the end of the lesson, he scooped some of the potion into a flask, corked it, and took it up to Snape's desk for marking, feeling that he might at last have scraped an E. He had just turned away when he heard a smashing noise. Malfoy gave a gleeful yell of laughter. Harry whipped around. His potion sample lay in pieces on the floor, and Snape was watching him with a look of gloating pleasure. "Whoops," he said softly. "Another 0, then, Potter?" Harry was too incensed to speak. He strode back to his cauldron, intending to fill another flask and force Snape to mark it, but saw to his horror that the rest of the contents had vanished. "I'm sorry," said Hermione with her hands over her mouth. "I'm really sorry, Harry. I thought you'd finished, so I cleared up." Harry could not bring himself to answer. When the bell rang, he hurried out of the dungeon without a backwards glance, and made sure that he found himself a seat between Neville and Seamus for lunch, so that Hermione could not start nagging him again about using Umbridge's office. He was in such a bad mood by the time he got to divination that he had quite forgotten his careers appointment with Professor McGonagall, remembering it only when Ron asked him why he wasn't in her office. He hurtled back upstairs and arrived out of breath, only a few minutes late. "Sorry, Professor," he panted as he closed the door. "I forgot." "No matter, Potter," she said briskly. But as she spoke, somebody else sniffed from the corner. Harry looked round. Professor Umbridge was sitting there, a clipboard on her knee, a fussy little pie frill around her neck, and a small, horribly smug smile on her face. "Sit down, Potter," said Professor McGonagall tersely. Her hands shook slightly as she shuffled the many pamphlets littering her desk. Harry sat down with his back to Umbridge, and did his best to pretend he could not hear the scratching of her quill on her clipboard. "Well, Potter, this meeting is to talk over any career ideas you might have, and to help you decide which subjects you should continue into the 6th and 7th years," said Professor McGonagall. "Have you had any thoughts about what you would like to do after you leave Hogwarts?" Said Harry. He was finding the scratching noise from behind him very distracting. "Yes," Professor McGonagall prompted Harry. "Well, I thought of, maybe, being an Auror," Harry mumbled. "You need top grades for that," said Professor McGonagall, extracting a small dark leaflet from under the mass on her desk and opening it. "They ask for a minimum of 5 NEWTs, and nothing under exceeds expectations grade, I see. Then you will be required to undergo a stringent series of character and aptitude tests at the Auror office. It's a difficult career path, Potter. They only take the best. In fact, I don't think anybody has been taken on in the last 3 years. At this moment, Professor Umbridge gave a very tiny cough, as though she was trying to see how quietly she could do it. Professor McGonagall ignored her. "You'll want to know which subjects you ought to take, I suppose," she went on, talking a little louder than before. "Yes," said Harry. "Defence against the dark arts, I suppose." "Naturally," said Professor McGonagall crisply. "I would also advise—" Professor Umbridge gave another cough, a little more audible this time. Professor McGonagall closed her eyes for a moment, opened them again, and continued as though nothing had happened. "I would also advise transfiguration, because Aurors frequently need to transfigure or untransfigure in their work. And I ought to tell you now, Potter, that I do not accept students into my NEWT classes unless they have achieved exceeds expectations or higher at ordinary wizarding level. I'd say you're averaging acceptable at the moment, so you'll need to put in some good hard work before the exams to stand a chance of continuing. Then you ought to do charms, always useful, and potions. Yes, Potter, potions," she added, with the merest flicker of a smile. "Poisons and antidotes are essential study for Aurors, and I must tell you that Professor Snape absolutely refuses to take students who get anything other than outstanding in their OWLs, so—" Professor Umbridge gave her most pronounced cough yet. "May I offer you a cough drop, Dolores?" Professor McGonagall asked curtly, without looking at Professor Umbridge. "Oh, no, thank you very much," said Umbridge with that simpering laugh Harry hated so much. "I just wondered whether I could make the teensiest interruption, Minerva." "I dare say you'll find you can," said Professor McGonagall through tightly gritted teeth. "I was just wondering whether Mr. Potter has quite the temperament for an Auror," said Professor Umbridge sweetly. "Were you?" said Professor McGonagall haughtily. "Well, Potter," she continued, as though there had been no interruption, "if you are serious in this ambition, I would advise you to concentrate hard on bringing your transfiguration and potions up to scratch. I see Professor Flitwick has graded you between acceptable and exceeds expectations for the last 2 years, so your charm work seems satisfactory. As for defence against the dark arts, your marks have been generally high. Professor Lupin in particular thought you— "Are you quite sure you wouldn't like a cough drop, Dolores?" "Oh, no need, thank you, Minerva," simpered Professor Umbridge, who had just coughed her loudest yet. "I was just concerned that you might not have Harry's most recent defence against the dark arts marks in front of you. I'm quite sure I slipped in a note." "What, this thing?" said Professor McGonagall in a tone of revulsion, as she pulled a sheet of pink parchment from between the leaves.
So there we have it. A hugely unsuccessful project. Really? It's not as elegant or as wand-like as I'd hoped. More of a blunt, daggery bit of wood. If you were to give it to someone, it would be Professor Umbridge, wouldn't it? It's a stubby one. But that's okay. We live and learn. I have a few other ideas I will have to get to. It is bigger, but not as elegant as I had hoped. Partly to do with my ambition with the size of it. You saw it was wobbling a bit, and that's purely because of the distance between centres and how thin I was getting. Not to mention that it's 3 bits of pallet wood, so crappy pine and some other stuff, glued together, so it's never going to have massive amounts of stability in it to start with, but it is fun. It does have a nice sort of pattern coming through it there, which I got from Peter Brown, or the idea from Peter Brown at Shop Time. I'll put a link down below to his channel. The wand idea, I just love Harry Potter, but that bit of detail came from his bit of genius. So, yeah, not overly happy with it. But that's the whole point of trying these things, to live and learn, really. Stay safe. Look after yourselves. Hugely unsuccessful pro